What's going on, guys? Alec here from Oz Fury Gaming. Today I'm here to have a bit of a chat about the Hammerhead and the Hawks Q&A and have a bit of discussion about my views on both ships and how the concept sales were handled, in my opinion. So it starts off with, we have the first set of questions for our Hammerhead, starting off with the Hammerheads Computers. Can all the turrets be controlled by an AI? Which is a really big question, and that depending on what we do with the computer, but more than likely we'll only be able to actually have 4 turrets AI powered. The computer is pretty good, but if you want to try and upgrade other aspects of the ship, then probably AI turrets aren't exactly the way to go. But it's all in concept. Next part: can the power plant run 24 size 4 laser cannons? And yes, it's going to be sufficient. With the big hole in the middle, what's that about? Basically, it's weight saving. So imagine sports cars. And how will the Hammerhead speed, maneuvering, all that handle against something like the Polaris? Well, basically, the ship's designed to chase down AA targets, so your Sabres, your Super Hornets, that sort of thing. So it's fairly quick, fairly maneuverable for a ship of its size, hence why weight saving, hence why too it can't really take big hits. We'll talk about that in a minute. Next up on the bit, the modularity, can we put scanner stations in, things like that, and you can't put it in that negative space where that hole is. There's nothing to go there. That's the main point of it, is weight saving. Now the Hammerhead also too is designed for one job and one job in mind, and that is to basically be a gunboat, right? Go as an escort for military purposes or civilian purposes, perhaps if you're going into pirate territory, and to really keep away pirates, such as buccaneers, or they come in with a cutlass, something like that, to keep them away and to possess a threat. But it does have its weaknesses, which we'll chat about later too. Now, there seems to be inconsistencies in the ship's stats, blah, 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 blah. Now, there is 6 turrets, and now when they initially did the Aegis video for the ATV on the concept sale, they talked about 2 unmanned turrets, and this is where it kicks in for me. They basically released the concept sale and then did a last-minute change, and that last-minute change was after they shot the video for ATV. I understand there's time frame to edit and record, but it seems like to me that it was rushed, and really what they should have done is done the sale at the end of the manufacturer sales. They did it with Aegis. Understand why that was done, and also obviously they want to sell the ship start off with so people have cash. But I think it was a really bad way to go about it, to cock it up like that. Next part here, turrets on the Hammerhead look quite fragile. What's its weaknesses? How's it going to go around? The turrets are kind of weak, but having a great gyroscopic view, as well as having a lot of firepower and being able to turn quickly, makes it very difficult for the ships such as Sabres or anything like that, which you'll be fighting to knock them out. So keep that in mind. And it shows in the concept image that all the turrets are firing forward. Now, as much as they fire forward, they don't fire to a point in the middle, and the turrets aren't exactly meant to be like full forward firing. They're meant to sort of cover a 360-degree view of the ship. So keep that in mind too if you're ever going into a firefight with it. Next thing here, it seems like there are a lot of quality of life features missing, like kitchens and stuff. Now there are mess holes. When they did the concept video for the Hammerhead, the 3D modeling of the interior didn't really show too much. It wasn't really great in regards to where everything was going to be and spaces like that. Now they did cover a bit more on it later, but basically not to worry, guys. There will be a kitchen and mess hall and stuff like that, a captain's quarters, all that sort of thing. Next up on the list too is missile launchers. So like anything, you can swap out the missile launchers and you can do different things to get different size missiles, but there are space restrictions. Now being concept, they're not quite sure how it's going to look if you try to mount torpedoes, for example, but keep in mind that the ship is designed to not go big, it's meant to have a lot of small. Best way to think about it, in my opinion. Next section we're going to look at here is about the components of the Hammerhead. Being a military-based ship, it's going to have military spec components, and yes, it will. This doesn't mean that it's going to be cheap to maintain, though. So you can put civilian components into the Hammerhead to make it cheaper to run, and also too, I think it'd be great to actually buy components and keep those military components for later missions when you're doing really intense firefights or anything to that extent. Just my 2 cents. So that's just to keep in mind as well. What is the ideal counter for the Hammerhead? Well, something like a Retaliator or anything that has long-range torpedoes is going to really cause the Hammerhead a lot of trouble. The Hammerhead, like I said, is a lot of small, so it's designed for taking on your Buccaneers, Sabres, Hornets, that sort of size ship, up to Cutlass, and then also to something like a Starfare or a Caterpillar, considering they don't have long-range weapons. But once you start getting into the military-grade bombers, so your Eclipse as well, will really cause the Hammerhead a lot of trouble. And being the fact that the scanner station on the Hammerhead isn't really that long, like you really want, if you're doing deep space patrols, you would really want a Terrapin or something with decent scanners to really be in the eyes for you. Alright, on to the last 3 questions now. Will the Hammerhead be a practical option for everyday gameplay? Well, it depends where you're at with your mission tier. If you're unaware, CIG is setting up the missions to basically be a big step ladder, so you start off small and you work your way up with the income and the difficulty of missions. So you can't just get your Idris from the store, jump in and go start doing massive missions. No, you've got to get reputation, you've got to get experience, you've got to work your way up the chain. This also will come into deaths of your character when it gets inherited across to next of kin. That reputation will drop, so blah blah blah. We'll talk about that in another video. But next question. Can we expect any ramming ability? Well, it's not designed per se, as they say in lore, but I imagine it's going to have the ability to do it. As it says here, the internal fronts of the ship are quite rigid and strong. Now, it seems to have a short range for its medium-sized quantum fuel tanks. But yeah, it's got a large quantum drive. What's the go? Now, this was a good question that I had too when I was reading through the stats. And basically, I do understand where CIG are coming with this by saying that being an escort ship, it's meant to just sort of go from a port, go out, do its escort run and come back. It's not designed for long distance travel, or if it is going long distance, it'll be in a flotilla of ships, so it'll have perhaps a Starfare, a Gemini with it, or some other refueling option to keep it going. So, makes sense. Good logical choices. So with that being said and done, let's move on to the Hawk, shall we? The Hawk is a very unique vehicle in being the fact that it's a starter bounty hunting ship, and being that you can't actually swap out the holding cell, which is a great answer to our first question here. So, like for example with the Aurora or the Mustang, which are a multi-purpose starter ship, the great old Hawk here can't do that. Similar to how the Gladius is a dedicated fighter, the Hawk has some decent firepower, being the fact it's meant to hunt people down, but it has no missiles. It has 4 size 2 guns and 2 size 1 guns. But don't be confused though, because the size 2 mounts come standard with size 1 guns apparently, which I thought they were meant to be checking out when they talked about how they're going to make just one size gun fits that mount. So I don't really understand what's going on there. If you check out the stats page, it's what it says. Alright, next bit, EMP. Now the Hawk has 1 EMP, which is within the neighborhood of one of the Raven's EMPs. So basically, it's pretty small. I imagine it'd be something like maybe a bit bigger than the Avenger Warlock, but we'll have to see when they finish the concept of it. Next question here is, when will the variants be available that are mentioned in the brochure? Now, personally, I actually must have missed that bit, but the variants that are mentioned in the brochure are actually only fiction. Right? They're only in lore of Star Citizen. This is the only Hawk that we'll ever see, apparently. We'll see how things go. Will the Hawk fit in a Carrack? No, that's designed for a snub fighter, but things can change. And the gun rack that's mentioned in the brochure is behind the deployable seat. Next few questions. It was mentioned in the ATV that the prisoner transport could be used as a bed for the pilot. And yes, that is the case. They haven't changed that. So this makes it a nice starter ship in the fact that, you can go between ports, so you can do whatever you want, and you can actually go and have a sleep. Which, in my opinion, makes it a much more usable ship than the Gladius. Next question. How does it compare against the Gladius, Mustang, Delta, and the Defender, considering they're all pretty much light fighters? Well, it's got heavier armor than the Gladius. The shields are on par with the Gladius, but the countermeasures, you can't beat it against the Mustang Delta. The Mustang Delta has that hands down. So basically, it's actually decent enough in a firefight, just without those missiles. What's the heaviest armor you can wear? Being a single-seater, you can only have a flight suit, but having the gun rack behind the seat means you can gear up quickly for FPS action. Now, is a Hawk going to be fast-tracked in development? Being a small fighter, it'll take a lot less work to do. And the loaner ship is the Cutlass Black, which I thought was strange. I would have expected a Titan Stalker. Anyway, moving on. We have the speed, right? It's a bit interesting. The flight speed is 165 meters per second in atmosphere with a maximum airspeed of 339 meters per second. And we'll talk about it a little bit later, but the actual max speed of the ship with afterburn is 500 meters per second, which is really slow. and they have some interesting logic behind it, I suppose. Next question, why make a bounty hunting ship with no interior? First of all, it's a starter ship, so don't get too carried away. Second of all, making interior spaces takes up more weight, so trying to be a nimble fighter, it's not really logical to have a massive interior. Which brings us to the size of the ship. It's 17 meters long, 22 meters wide, 6.5 meters tall. And that'd be 22 meters wide with the wings fully extended, I'd imagine. Now let's talk about this 500 meters per second afterburner speed. Why is it so low compared to something like the Gladius? And it's simply because being a starter bounty hunting ship, they wanted to sort of have a drawback on it. Because if it was really quick, it sort of becomes this perfect bounty hunting ship, right? To a sense where it's really cheap to run, so fair enough. Now this is an anvil ship, but it's still a light fighter. This class of ship relies on speed to survive and win fights. Since it's already stated to be slower than the Gladius, what other points make the ship a viable choice over it since the Gladius got the size 3 buff? While it has heavier armor like we discussed earlier, and also too its shields are on point, now having no missiles is a drawback, and we'll talk about in another video on the firepower of the Hawk versus the Gladius, but it is quite underpowered gun-wise. So it's sort of a bit of a mix and match really, but two different playstyles is the best way to describe it. Yes, the Gladius is a dedicated fighter. This ship is a dedicated bounty hunting ship. So it's kind of got two different ideas in mind. Now, if it was to be as quick as the Gladius, it would be probably a little bit overpowered in per se, being the fact it's meant to be a starter ship. And this also brings into consideration how's it going to go against other ships such as a Cutlass Black, like you see taken down. Because a Cutlass Black isn't exactly the most underpowered ship either. So this brings into the whole starter bounty hunting question, right? It's only really meant to take on ships such as an Avenger, Mustang, Aurora, pirates that are low-key, not really doing a huge amount. So I'm going to end the video there, guys. I hope you got something out of it, understand it a little bit better, and I hope to catch you guys with some more videos before Christmas and get some more info out. Toodaloo.